So today's lesson is all about completing a square. The key idea that we're looking to do today is to convert y equals ax squared plus bx plus c into y equals ax minus b squared plus q. Now, the first type of equation that we had studied throughout this entire course was called the standard equation for the quadratic, right? This second one is what we call the vertex form. Now, each of these different forms give us certain information. For example, during my lesson, I basically said that the standard form gave us the y-intercept. And the y-intercept is always the c value that's left over, right? And for the vertex form, it actually gives us information like the vertex, PQ, of our parabola, right? Now, if I actually take something like this, I can use this to give me a point. I can use this thing to give me the vertex, and that will give me 2 points that will allow me to draw the rest of my graph, right? Now, here's a question for you. Why is it important to get the vertex form that we're talking about right here? So in this case, it gets us the vertex, but that also tells us what the max is and what the min is, and also what value of x gives us the max or the min, right? Now, notice I'm not putting all that in here right now. What we're going to do is we're going to first take our time and understand how to complete the square. So right now, we're just going to take a bit of time and understand how we complete the square. The first thing that you have to do is you have to add and you have to subtract this quantity, b over 2 squared, from this basic equation, right? So anytime you see that y is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c, we got to do it, right? Then the next thing that we have to do is we just have to factor the first three things. Now remember what I said before. You must add and subtract first. You notice how I emphasized add and then we subtracted afterwards? That b squared, b over 2 squared from this equation here, right? No, we need to use that, but we need to make sure we do the add and subtract in our equation first. Then we put the last two terms together. So for our first example, we're going to take this equation. Y is equal to x squared plus 4x minus 9. Now, like we said, we had to identify the b value in our equation, which is the 4, right? And then we had to do a calculation. So remember, our calculation is b over 2 and square it, right? Which is just, well, 4 over 2 squared, which is 2 squared, which is, well, that's just 4, isn't it? So that is what I call an aside, right? So when you've got some calculation that you have to do for your math, put it off to the side and then use it and stick it into your equation. So now I'm going to rewrite this equation. Y is equal to x squared plus 4x plus 4 first. Remember, we have to add first and then subtract the 4. So essentially we're adding a 0, and then we have minus 9. So now you end up with y is equal to x squared plus 4x plus 4. Remember, I said we had to factor the first bracket. So we put all the information in the first three, from the first three terms in a bracket, then we go and factor it. Then we still have what's left over, this minus 4 and this minus 9. Now, when we do our final calculation, this is how we get it. Now, you don't have to think too difficultly, okay? Your equation is going to be in this form. Y is equal to something all squared plus or minus some number, okay? Now, I'm going to show you something interesting. So, the first term of the factored term in here would be x. Now, just think of it as, what is the square root of x squared? That's just x, isn't it? And now, the end term of this is also the square root of the last number, which is 2. And the sign that we have comes from, the sign between them comes from the middle number, which is plus 2 in this case. And then the final part of our equation comes by doing the addition of the minus 4 and the minus 9, which ends up being minus 13. Now, let's try this example again, but this time, imagine we have this equation. So, we have y is equal to x squared minus 6x minus 2. So now we'll do an aside again. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus on this 6. And we're going to take 6 divided by 2. We're going to square it. And that's going to be 3 all squared, which gives us 9. So that means we're going to be saying y is equal to x squared plus 6x plus 9 and minus 9 and minus 2. Now, just like we did before, we're going to take the first 3 terms, put them together. So we got x squared plus 6x plus 9, all in brackets. And then we still have our minus 9 and our minus 2. Now, just like before, we will add those at the end, right? So now we use what we did from before. So we know that our final equation is going to be something like this because we are completing the square. So we got something all squared and then either plus a number or minus a number at the end, right? So we look at the first term. The square root of x squared is x. The square root of the last number, 9, is 3. And, oh my goodness, and the sign is going to be positive because it came from the middle term, right? And now we just have to add up our last 2 terms here, minus 9 and minus 2, which gives us negative 11. And based on this, you could come up with the vertex for your parabola. And that is our final answer. Okay, now, this answer here is exactly the same as this other one, right? You used exactly the same concepts, right? You had to pull an aside, do the calculation, figure out what you were going to add and subtract, because, you know, adding and subtracting, this thing here is essentially 0. It doesn't change the equation. All we've done is manipulate it so we could go and get something new out of it. So, our third problem happens when we have a number sitting in a negative sign sitting in front of the x squared term. Well, how the heck do we handle that? So, here is the trick. The hint is to basically put the negative x squared and the 8x into the brackets first, right? So the thing is, when you do that, you're going to end up with something that looks like this. Y is equal to, in brackets, negative x squared plus 8x, right? And then we have our minus 3. Nothing's really changed, right? Now, in this thing here, what we're going to do is we're going to factor out a negative 1. And the reason why that is because when we have negative x squared, it really means there's a negative 1 sitting on the x squared. So we're going to pull that out. So we end up with something that looks like this. Y is equal to negative 1 x squared. So negative 1 x squared divided by negative 1 gives us x squared. And then we divide the second one by negative 1, and we end up with negative 8x, right? And you'll notice how I'm putting an extra space here because this is going to save us some time. Because this is where we're going to find our aside function, our numbers that we're going to add and subtract that doesn't change it. And we still have our minus 3. So now we need to find out what number we have to add and subtract to this whole thing to make it a perfect square. So let's do that right now. You're going to do your aside. So here's your aside, and what you're going to do is you're going to go and calculate negative 8 over 2 squared, which equals, well, negative 4, and you square it. And that gives us 16. So that means we're going to be adding 16. Remember, we add first, and then we subtract 16. Now, the biggest issue is before, all we did was put brackets around this stuff here, right? Now, because we did that, because we were able to do that from before, right? It was easy. The addition was easy, but this time we have to account for it, okay? So I want you to imagine what happens here. So we still get our y is equal to negative 1, and then we get x squared minus 8x plus 16, right? Now, imagine that we need to take this 16 and bring it outside, right? Now, to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to add the result of multiplying the negative 1 and the 16, the negative 16 that we had inside the bracket. So we end up with negative 1 times negative 16. And all I want to know is what the heck this is, right? And then when you add, and then you still have to add your minus 3 from before. So now, when we do our simplification, we have y is equal to negative 1, and we still know our answer is going to be something in a squared, right? And we're just going to use that same concept as before. So remember, the two numbers come from this, and it's the square root of x squared is x, and the square root of 16 is 4, and we get the sign from the middle term, so it's minus 4. So we get x minus 4 all squared. Now, this thing, plus, minus, minus. A plus and two minuses gives us a plus. And then 1 times 16 is 16, so it's plus 16 minus 3. And now we can simplify finally to y is equal to negative 1, x minus 4 squared, and then plus 13 as our final answer in vertex form once we've completed the square. Now, a similar thing can be done when we have a number sitting on our x squared term. Let's see how that works. So let's say we have this problem, example 4. Y is equal to 2x squared minus 16x minus 3, right? And now all we're going to do is we're going to do exactly what we did before when we had our minus sign sitting on the x. We put a bracket around everything with the 2x and the 16x, okay? So you end up with 2x squared minus 16x. And then we still have our minus 3. So now, let's go and write this again. So now we're going to common factor the number 2 that's sitting on the x. So we're going to common factor the 2 out. So now you're going to get the following. 2 bracket x squared minus 8x, right? And then we're going to put big enough space so we can add and subtract the number that we're looking for. Here we go, minus 3. So now you do your aside and you go, okay, negative 8 divided by 2, we're going to square it. We're going to get negative 4 squared, which gives us 16. So we're going to have to add add 16 and subtract 16 in our bracket. Okay? And so now we're going to do exactly what we did before. We end up with this whole part in a bracket. So we end up with y is equal to 2 x squared minus 8x plus 16 in its own bracket. And then we're going to add the result of the number 2 that we had and the negative 16. And then we're going to go subtract minus 3. So when you do your simplification, your final stage, you still have your 2, then you've got all this all squared, and then we have some number here, right? So we'll figure out what we're going to do there. So now what we're going to do is, remember, we take the square root of x squared is x, the square root of 16 is 4, and then we take the subtraction. So we end up with x minus 4 all squared. But this part here has to be calculated, right? So you go, okay, plus 2 times negative 16 gives us negative 32 minus 3. Okay, and we end up with y is equal to 2, x minus 4 all squared minus 35. And you're done. Day 1 homework is number 1. All of them. There are about 6 to 9 questions. Do them, please. Okay? So this is homework day 1, and that is 2.5. Good luck, guys, and have a good evening.